Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week, we journey to the time between when the oceans drank Atlantis and the rise of the sons of Arius. Today, we begin our journey to the time when Conan the Cimmerian would trod the jeweled thrones of the earth beneath his sandaled feet. Yes, this week I begin a 3-part series talking about Robert E. Howard's Conan RPG published by Modiphius. This one's going to be a little bit different from other series because I'm actually going to start talking about the creation of the setting and a little bit about the writing before I talk about the setting itself. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we travel to times of high adventure. There are settings that strike something, that there is some greater passion stirred by the setting, and people, even after the author's passing, want to just keep going with that. We have seen this in settings such as The Lord of the Rings, Cthulhu stories of H.P. Lovecraft, the Tarzan stories of Edgar Rice Burroughs, and so many others. In some cases, it might be the literary executors take the notes of the original author and publish them. Clean them up, tidy them up, and make them available for everyone, as we saw with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. In some cases, you have authors revisiting the works and trying to do their new spins on them, to modernize them, and what have you, as we see quite frequently with Sherlock Holmes. And then you have the ones where someone takes what was written by this author, grabs hold of it, and runs with it. We've seen this with, of course, H.P. Lovecraft's works, but we've also seen this with Robert E. Howard. And in fact, Robert E. Howard's Hyperborean Ages are the most successful example of someone grabbing someone else's ball and running with it as far and as fast as they can. It is because of this that stories written between 1926 and 1936 have a character in them who has become a household name. You will be hard to find anyone, at least in the U.S., who has not heard the name Conan the Barbarian. But you have to remember that there's far more to this than just Robert E. Howard's work. Or should I say, more to this than just Conan itself. Robert E. Howard created the predecessor to Conan. The one who the destruction of his world led to the Hyperborean Ages. Kull the Conqueror. Yes, that's right. That particular Kevin Sorbo movie was actually based on the works of Robert E. Howard. And from there you have authors who took Howard's work. You see, Howard actually wrote through multiple drafts an essay that got published between 1936 and 1938 called The Hyperborean Age. And this essay was essentially the world of Conan. It included maps of the world, details of every single kingdom, the history, the timeline, everything. And this was sort of the groundwork, the foundation that others would take from Howard's 17 published stories of Conan. Yes, that's right. There were only 17 stories of Howard's that were published. Other authors, like Elsbrog de Camp, Lynn Carter, would take Howard's notes, would take things he had outlined, would take stories he wrote featuring other characters, and turn them into fully fledged Conan stories. Oh yes, they would credit Howard, the created by type thing, or you'd see it as written like L. Sprague de Camp and Robert E. Howard. And that's how they would keep this work going. And let's be honest, without them doing this, we would not know of Conan today. We would not have seen the great Schwarzenegger movie, which took extreme liberties with the original source material. We would not have seen the excellent in its own right, but extremely untrue to the original source material animated series from the early 90s, late 80s. We would not have seen the multiple RPGs created over the years for Age of Conan, or the Age of Conan itself. We would not have seen such video games as the wonderfully made but overly ambitious Age of Conan, or the survival game Conan Exiles. There's so much we wouldn't have seen without these early authors grabbing Howard's ball and running with it. However, when you really get down to it, someone else can take someone else's writing. They can take that person's notes. They can try as hard as they might to make their works sound and feel like the works of the person that they are mimicking. But they're not that person. There are subtle differences that will always creak through in their writing. And you can, at least according to some, you can tell the difference between a story written by Robert E. Howard and a story written by DeCamp or Lynn Carter. And this is the huge thing, because the current RPG printed by Modiphius, Robert E. Howard's Conan, Adventures in an Age Undreamed of, has endeavored to go with the modern scholarship, the looking into what Howard wrote, focusing on everything that Howard wrote to the exclusion of anything else. I'm sure some of the tropes that got used in later are still part of this, because they will always be sort of the framework for how people view Conan. And let's face it, when you have artists like Frank Frazetta and Boris Vallejo having done the covers for classic Conan novels, you're going to have that imagery sink through. Now, one thing I am very, very glad to see that they did in this book is they will have sidebars that are focusing not on the normal issues you would think of. Instead, they are focusing on what would Howard do. And among the things Howard did was he used real-world historical cultures as a sort of inspiration. He savaged them up a bit, like he used medieval France as the inspiration for Aquilonia. But yet, Aquilonia isn't really medieval France. He took various African kingdoms as inspirations for some regions of the world. He, of course, took the 1920s to 30s understanding of Egypt and used that in creating the culture of Stygia. And then you have just the fact that he wrote not just Conan, he wrote other stories all set in this period. Remember, though, he wrote 17 stories only featuring Conan. And in fact, the first story, The Phoenix on the Sword, was written after Conan became king. It was actually a story of political intrigue with people plotting to assassinate King Conan and him having a dream that warned him of the assassination attempt, so that instead of the assassins finding a sleeping, helpless man, they found a mighty warrior, half-armored, with a big sword, ready to kill them. And that's the thing. Conan is not just a big, strong barbarian who kills things really well. He is a thief. He is a corsair. He is a thespian. Yes, there's something you didn't think of. And all these stories create the core of who Conan is, but yet they also create the core of the world. Because they create a world where one man could be all of these things. Unlike many other novels or stories focusing on a particular character, where that character is defined as one thing forever. Conan changed. And with that, I'm going to end this brief overview. And understand, this was an overview. There are elements I know I overly simplified. There are elements I probably got a little wrong just because there is so much to really sum up. And so it's easy to get lost or mistaken in the details. With that, though, I'm going to conclude this discussion of the original source material. Next week, I'm going to talk about the setting of Conan, the Hyperborean Age itself. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.